Well, good morning. I'm Jim Morgan. I'm here to talk to you about our Teaching Tuesday. Our speaker, unfortunately, couldn't make it, so there's something I've been wanting to do anyway. So we just went ahead and I wrote this for today. Now, this is something I said I wrote it for today, but I've been teaching this for the last, 30 years. It is basically it's time of the year to start setting goals and start to put together your goal planning for next year. I know a lot of people don't even want to do goals because they don't think they work. These work. These work every time that you use them. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how that works. And hopefully you'll find that this is beneficial to you as well. So let me do a quick screen share. Okay. So get this thing going here. So it's the season. We're in December. It is now time to start working on getting our goals going and getting things set up to be able to do things to get your goals for next year, to get 2023 off to the right start, make things happen. So it's time to start setting your goals. So what are we going to do about it? Question is, do you set goals? I mean, are you doing it now? Do you set goals, or is it kind of like a New Year's resolution where you kind of throw some ideas out there and give up on them by about February? So, and then the next question is, when you set your goals, do you reach them, or do you think the whole idea is a waste of time? I mean, that is not uncommon in today's world. Why do most people fail in setting goals and reaching goals? They've never been taught how to do it. And most people set their goals backwards and don't even know it. So we're going to start working on how to set this up. Most people set goals that sound good to them. They sound good to repeat at parties or in a coffee pot or at work, and they're not what they truly care about or are committed to. Let me kind of explain this. My background, I'm with Caring Transitions now. We basically help people downsize, seniors predominantly downsize, move, pack, whatever. But for the last 38 years, I was in the real estate business. And and then I was in a marketing company as well. And I've been teaching how to set goals for years, repeating what I had been taught by some masters previously to this. And there's ways you can do it that absolutely work. But what most people do, and I've been teaching this in the real estate business for decades, what most people in the real estate business do, they set a goal that, well, I want to do $5 million in sales this year, or I want to, whatever it is. And it's something that sounds good at a party. It's something that sounds good when they're hanging out with other realtors. This is my goal. But it's a goal they literally pulled out of thin air. They didn't do any back work to figure out really what it meant to do that, what it's going to take to do that. And so because of that, the chances of them hitting it are pretty slim. Most people have lied to them, and this is another reason why people don't hit their goals. Most people have lied to themselves so often on goals that their own subconscious doesn't believe them, and you're basically doomed before you can start. What I mean by that is this. Maybe you're guilty of this, and most of us are, is like, well, I'm going to lose 20 pounds, or I'm going to make 100 grand this year, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that, and then you don't. So every time you've done that, you've programmed your subconscious mind that when you say you're going to do something, your subconscious mind no longer believes it. Well, if it's not engaged, it's actually setting up and staging the situation to basically doom your progress, because it's going to find all the reasons why it won't work. So you need to start working on setting goals that are attainable, that you can keep, like almost literally like with your kids when you put their check marks or their papers on the refrigerator. You want to do the same kind of thing for yourself. You're reprogramming your subconscious to believe you. So I'd much rather see you make a goal that seems absurdly small, but one that you consistently hit. In other words, let's say if we're going to make phone calls, and you have never really made prospecting phone calls before, I would rather you set a goal that you're going to make 3 phone calls a day than 30. Because let's put it this way: if you set a goal for 30 and you hit 27, I would rather you set a goal for 3 and hit 3. The reason being is at 27, you missed your goal and you lied to yourself again. If you set a goal for 3 and you hit 3, you're getting that little check mark. Yes, I did it. Yes, I did what I said I was going to do. And that's a big deal. Then you can always keep expanding that reach. Most people take a goal that sounds good but never work through the process. Okay, so here's what we're going to have to do. We're going to start showing you how to go in and take a goal apart and what it's going to take to make it happen, and break it down to a bite-sized piece. But to do this, first of all, you need to find your why and what do you really want and what really moves you. You know, many times, like I said, we're taking goals that maybe we have a manager that says, well, I want you to do this or what have you. If it's not internalized, if it's not something that really means something to you, then it's going to be pretty easy to give up on it. Okay. I had a mentor that explained it to me this way. We were actually sitting in a diner someplace, and he was explaining that the problem is not the problem. The problem never has been the problem, never will be the problem. And what I mean by that is, or what he meant by that was, so many of us will make excuses of things of what the problem is. You know, I'm too old, I'm too young, I'm not educated enough, I'm too educated, I'm, you know, too fat, I'm too skinny, whatever it is. We like to find an excuse as to why we can't achieve what it is we want to do. Well, the reality is, if there's ever been anyone that has the same problem that you have that has achieved what you want, then that means the problem was not the problem. Did you hear that? If anyone has ever achieved what you want that has the same thing that you consider to be your problem while you're not achieving it, then that problem was not the problem. Here's where it comes down to. He pulled out, we're sitting in this diner, and he pulls out the salt and pepper shaker and he sticks them in front of us. And he said, okay, he goes, you're the salt and the pepper is your goal. That's your thing you're after. He goes, as long as you can see it and you sit there and you look at it and you can see it, your odds of hitting it are pretty good, because you got your eyes on the goal, you know what you need to do, you know what you want to do, and you're after it. However, as soon as you set a goal, something's going to happen to you and something's going to get in the way. And it's what it basically comes down to is it's called an obstacle. So he took the napkin holder and he put it between the salt and pepper shaker. And he goes, so now you've got an obstacle that's in your way, and it takes your eyes off of the goal and you start putting your eyes on the obstacle. And once you do that, you are now focused on all the problems. You're focused on all the reasons why you can't. You're focused, you know, woe is me, I've got this problem, I got that problem. And I'm going to give you a little secret. Every time you set a goal, there's going to be obstacles that get in the way. The question is, do you focus on them, or do you figure out how to refocus on your goal? So what he told me was, you need to reestablish that dream, that goal, that why, and make it big enough that you can see it over your obstacles. So he put the coffee pot there and showed me that, you know, you need to be able to have something where you can look past your obstacles at a big enough why that moves you, that gets you going when things aren't going well. You know, it's I'll give you an example. One of my truly favorite stories as far as this goes, it literally was it was a gentleman that I knew. He was in a marketing company, and Paul basically was doing this marketing business on part-time. He had a really good job. He was making pretty good money, so he really didn't have a big need. He loved it from a social standpoint. Well, then all of a sudden, Paul was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of lymph node cancer, and pretty much knew that he had, you know, so much time left. So Paul wanted, all of a sudden, his why became very, very strong. He wanted to leave something behind that would be a continuing income and asset for his wife and his family once he was gone. So that became his driving obsession. Now, I was, you know, watching this up close and personal. I mean, he was a friend of mine, so I watched what happened. And Paul would, go through the chemotherapy and all that kind of stuff, and he would be so sick that his wife, Peg, would drive him to these meetings that he would be doing where he'd be speaking. The entire drive there, he'd be driving with his head out the window, throwing up from being ill from the chemo and what have you. And he'd get there, he'd get himself, cleaned up, he'd get himself, straightened up, motivated and fired up, and he'd go in and he'd do a presentation. He would work with all the people afterwards and get excited and get people fired up and get next meeting scheduled, and he'd go back out to the car and then crash in the back seat and pass out, and his wife would drive him home. He would generate enough energy for that 2 hours or so he was in that meeting, and then he would just fold in the back seat and go home. And he did this night after night after night after night after night. And I was there when he had hit his goal, when he had achieved this, this particular business goal, and he was speaking that night. And I'm standing there in the audience watching this. And I mean, Paul was wearing a gray suit. He had like a gray wig on, and his skin was almost the same color. He was skeletal in his what was left of him. And I was standing next to his oncologist who was crying. And the oncologist told me, he goes, he'd never met anyone quite like Paul, because he goes physically, he doesn't have enough muscle tone to hold his head up. But there he was standing on stage with a microphone, speaking and pouring this into an audience of people. Paul, the problem wasn't the problem. The dream was bigger than the problem. Now, he only lived about another week after he'd hit his goal, but I'll never forget that moment. There's on a less dramatic, standpoint, a mentor of mine who was an amazing individual. In fact, his training program he created, I found out later that Gary Keller of Keller Williams Real Estate bought his training program, and that became the entire key to the Keller Williams model. Then Remax took it and rebranded it, called it Momentum, but it's all the same thing, but it all came from Dexter. And this mentor of mine was being mentored by Dexter, and he was talking about every time he'd get with him, they'd go out driving around and they'd talk and they would start dreaming and they'd set goals, they'd do things, and they'd always end up about 3 o'clock in the morning. If you're with Dexter, you're going to be up all night, but he'd get about 3 o'clock in the morning, they'd end up at this marina and they'd be sitting in this boat that Dexter really liked and really wanted, this speedboat. And this was like the third time that this particular individual was with Dexter in this speedboat at 3 o'clock in the morning. And he goes, Dex, why in the world don't you just buy this boat? Now, this has been several years ago, and the boat was about a $50,000 boat. And Dex goes, well, I can't afford to do that. And the guy was taken aback because Dexter could have probably reached in his pocket and bought the marina. But Dexter was actually, flummoxed. It's like, I can't do that. And so Ron asked him, he goes, what do you mean you can't afford this boat? And Dexter goes, do you know how hard it is for me, with his level of wealth, to find something that I really, really, really want? And he goes, I have to milk all the want out of it before I get it. That particular phrase, if you can understand what I'm saying here, he was saying that if I've got a why that motivates me, that gets me up in the morning, that gets me through those times where things seem too hard, I've got to get all of that out of it before I move on to the next thing. That delayed gratification, that quest, that's a huge statement. And I had a situation one time myself where I had a activity goal that in one of my businesses I just never could hit. I was working full-time selling new homes, and that was full-time and a half at least. And then I had another marketing company on the side, and my marketing company, I had a goal of doing 30 first-time presentations in a month, part-time, which is a pretty stiff goal. And I would always get in the mid-20s, I'd never get 30. Well, one day, we used to travel around and speak and do all that kind of stuff. So I was going to go, and a bunch of buddies of mine that were also on the speaking circuit, we kind of had like a tie war, who had the coolest ties. So we were always out on a quest trying to find the coolest ties, because let's face it, you're wearing a suit, that's the only thing you can really augment it with is a tie. So I'm at this shop and I find this tie that, oh my gosh, it was awesome. It was red and it was black and it was gray and it would work with my black suit, work with my gray suit. I was very fired up about it. And I'm standing at the counter getting ready to buy it. And this was probably early 80s. And I could have bought it for, yeah, I don't know, I think it was $50, which was not cheap for a tie back then, but it was not, the end of the world either. But I'm getting ready to buy it. And it dawned on me that I wanted it. So I set the goal that I couldn't have it until I had 30 accomplished appointments in that month. So I put it back and then went out and got it. Well, the night before, the end of the month, I had 29. I needed one more, one more presentation. And I had no idea who I was going to talk to. I told my wife, I said, I'll be back, when I'm done and when I find somebody. And I'm out driving around, I'm out trying to figure something out, and I'm struggling. And I made the decision that as long as it was dark out, it was still that month. And so it was about 2 a.m. when I bumped into a guy when I was stopping to think about what I'm going to do next. I was getting a cup of coffee and I met this guy that was working at a village pantry. Turns out he was a immigrant that had just been brought in with the Jewish immigration, system. He was from Moldavia. He was a refugee. We get to talking and I got a chance to set up a presentation with him sitting there, and then end up building a pretty good sized organization with all these Moldavians that had come in from in Indianapolis and Chicago. But I got to go back and get my tie. Well, I still have that tie. It's way outdated, but it's the first thing I see when I walk in my closet, because to me, it's a trophy. You got to find the why that's going to make you to do things. That's really important. So the why can be anything that moves you. I don't care what it is, but if you're going to have a why, you've got to have a dollar amount attached to it. So you can break down how many of your business transactions is going to be required to reach it. A good example, I was coaching a woman and she had talked about for years that her dream, her why was, she was a transplant a patient, and she had met the family that the donor that had given her the heart that was why she was alive. She met them, she got to know them. She had this dream of wanting to take them all to the Dallas Cowboys football game, rent a suite, and really put on a thing for them as a thank you for her being alive, basically. And they were all Dallas fans, and she had this dream, she had this wish that she wanted to accomplish it. Well, I think it was like 3 years in a row she was telling me about this wish. And I asked her a question. I go, because she'd never gotten any closer to it. And I go, how much is it going to cost? And she had no idea. And I said, well, it's always going to be a wish until you make it real. You've got to put a dollar amount on it. How much is it going to cost to rent this thing, to get all the people there? If you got to fly them in, whatever the costs are, what's the cost going to be to get this done? And because once you break it down, let's say it was $20,000. I don't care what the number was. At 10,000, I don't care. But let's say it's, whatever that number is, now you can break down how many extra business transactions you're going to need over and above what you need to make your normal living to accomplish it. Then once you do, then all of a sudden it becomes real, and you can actually make it happen. So let's just say, for instance, that you figure out what your goal is and what your thing is. I'm going to do easy math because it just makes it easier for me to do. You can put whatever numbers in here, that move you. Maybe instead of a $20,000 bonus, you need to have a $100,000 bonus. I don't care. You need to figure out what it is you want and what it's going to take to make it happen. But in here, I'm going to say that you need 80 grand to cover your family lifestyle, and you want to take 20 grand to make that trip. Maybe you're taking those people to the Dallas game. I don't care. So now you're at $100,000 that you need to make for the year. So now, how many of your business transactions is it going to take for you to make that? And I don't know. I mean, I'm speaking today. I don't know if you're a realtor. I don't know if you're an elder law attorney. I don't know if you're, if you help families pick senior living communities. It doesn't matter what your business is. It doesn't matter what your transaction per income per transaction is. we are using this as an example. So you put in your own numbers, but let's say that you make $2,500 transaction, you want to make 100 grand so you can have your extra 20 to do your Y, then you need 40 transactions closed. So now we need to break down the activities needed to produce those closed transactions. I want to tell you a little secret. You cannot control the outcome. You cannot control how many clients are going to buy from you, use your services in any given month. You have no control on that. But you do have control on the amount of activities that you do each week, each day, each month. If you control the activities and you can figure out what the averages are, if I do this amount of phone calls, I get this many appointments, then you can make your activities work within the averages to make your outcome happen. And it becomes very, very simple to get accomplished. So the first action, you need 40 closed transactions. So how many contracts do you need to get that 40 closed? So in other words, if you're writing up a contract, you need to get them closed, but there's going to be a certain amount of contracts that you do that never actually close. Their financing falls through. They get a divorce. Somebody's in an accident. There's a million things that can disrupt that, so it doesn't actually close. So how many do you need to get on paper to get 40 to close? So let's just say your fallout rate for financing, cold feet, whatever, let's say that you have a dropout rate of 20%. Then you will need to write 50 contracts to get 40 to close. Okay, so you're gonna have 10 fall through. When I was selling new homes, I knew that when I was in Carmel, for instance, and I was selling new homes in Carmel, that my drop rate was about 10%. If I was in Lawrence Township, it was about 20%. So I had to adjust myself accordingly. So those are some things that you and part of it right now, if you're doing this for the first time, you're going to have to do your best guess on some of these percentages. But as you start doing this, you're going to start finding out that you're going to start knowing what these numbers are. Okay. So how many appointments do you need to meet with a client to get 50 contracts written? So in other words, how many times do you have to sit down with a client face to face, across the desk, to get them on paper? Is your close rate 50%? Is it 60? Is it 75? Is it more than that? Is it less than that? It really doesn't matter. Whatever it is where it is when you start, okay? So again, we're going to do some estimating on here unless you've got these numbers in your head and you already know what they are. But as you start measuring outcomes, when you start doing this, when this becomes part of who you are, you'll start figuring out how to improve those numbers. So let's say, for instance, you're at 50% now, but you start measuring this, you're going to start finding out, I need to improve here. And you're going to start working on areas that will improve your numbers. And, they always say that what is measured improves, and nothing improves that's not measured. So we are going to say you write contracts with 75% of your appointments. So if you're going to get 50 under contract, you need 67 appointments. So how many appointments do you need to make to get someone to meet with you without canceling or no showing? So in other words, how many appointments do you have to have in your calendar that actually have 67 show up? So again, do you get 80% or 90% to show up for their appointments? Do you have more than that? Is it worse than that? Again, we're going to measure this. We're going to guess for a while until you have it down. But let's say you have 90% of those you book an appointment with that show up for your appointment, and 10% fall out for whatever reason. So to get 67 appointments, you're going to need to book 74 appointments to keep 67 kept. So how many people do you need to talk to get an appointment? Are you getting from a conversation with someone, are you getting 50% of those to an appointment, 75%, 90%? I don't know. So let's just say, for purposes today, that you need to talk with 2 people to get 1 or 50% to make an actual appointment. If that's the case, then you will need to talk to 148 people on the phone, person to person, whatever, to book 74 appointments. Okay. So how many phone calls do you need to make? How many dials do you need to make to actually talk to someone? Not a voicemail. I mean, to actually speak with someone. So when you call and you just get a voicemail, you get a dial, nobody answers, whatever. Those, how many of those dials do you have to do to actually talk to a potential client? Does it take 2 dials, 3, 4, 5? How many? And now anybody that returns a call, that counts as a call. So if you call and you're making a list of calls and all of a sudden someone calls you back, you just made that call. That counts. You just had a conversation with that person. So let's assume that 3 dials for 1 conversation. So if you need to talk to 148 people, you would need to dial 445 times. Okay? So now we need to figure out how many days or weeks that you're going to work. So if you're going to work, let's say you're going to take 2 weeks of vacation. So that leaves you 250 days. So let's track holidays and some blow off days that you're just not going to work. So we're going to put that down to 220. So you're going to have 220 work days. So if you're going to make calls 220 days a year, and you need to make 2 dials per day, you take, the 440 divided by 220, and it's 2 dials a day. So that's the part that people always freak out. When you set this goal, I'm going to do all these different things, it can be intimidating because, and what most people do, let's say that, they need to have 40 closings to reach their goal. And by June, they have 10. And they just give up because it doesn't look possible, because they don't break it down to what they can control and down into the smallest denominator. All of a sudden, we had this 40 closing goal. We knew we had to write 50 contracts to do that. We need to make 440 calls. It turns out that's only 2 dials a day. So you have 2 dials per day. That gives you the 440 dials per year. That gives you 148 talked to, gives you 74 appointments made. It gives you the 67 appointments kept, gives you 50 under contract, gives you 40 closed transactions, gives you $2,500 per transaction. It gives you your $100,000. Now you're on your family trip. So guys, that is really all we're talking about. Is don't overcomplicate this. But if you take it, find out what it is you want, why what your why is, how much of, and then figure out what that why is going to actually cost. Break that down to how many transactions that really equates to. Then you make your setup to where how many those transactions, literally you break it down to how many transactions, how many are going to fall out, how many appointments you need to make, how many, literally all the way down to how many dials per day. And I don't care if it's dials. I don't care if it's, I got to meet X amount of people in networking. You determine for your particular business where your business comes from. But all of us are in the lead generation business. We have a tendency to think that I'm this, I'm that. I don't care what your title is. I don't care what your product is. The business comes down to meeting and greeting and talking to new people. We are in the lead generation business. If we set our goals accordingly to create activities that we can control, get it down to how many dials we have to make per day, and it doesn't matter what that dial does. To give you an idea, for years, when I was selling new homes, I would sit there and go through this process, and I would figure out, I need to make X. So with that, I would figure out I make about X, so much per transaction. I figured out how many closed transactions I had to make, and I would literally go through this whole process. But I was really old school, and it was very low tech. I started doing this back in the 80s. I would take a legal pad every the beginning of the year before the year started, and I would write down, if I needed to close 100 transactions to get my goal, I would write down 1 through 100 on a legal pad. And then as soon as my first contract took place, I would write their name on there. I would write down the price of the home that I sold them, and the basic details like that. And I would do that through through January. Then I draw a line under January, and there was my January. Then I would do the February and what have you. Then anyone that canceled, I already made the determination that I'm going to have, out of that 100, there'll be 20 that cancel or whatever it is. So when they would cancel, I used an orange marker, like a highlighter, and I'd go through it, and that was a cancellation. If it was when it closed, I'd use a green highlighter. And there'd be days that I'd have 3 that I would put an orange highlighter through. And what kept me from freaking out was I had already planned for them to cancel. Not that name, not that person, but I knew that I was going to have 20 people cancel. I just didn't know it's going to be them. So it really didn't bother me. It didn't freak me out. I couldn't have cared less because they were already planned to have that happen. The additional thing was, by the fact that I was doing this and I was doing these tracking, and I knew I had to make this many dials to have this many appointments to have this many in contract, I always knew if the market was changing 90 days before my competitors did. And the reason for that was, if I knew that I had to make 5 phone calls to get 1 appointment or whatever the number was, and all of a sudden I'm having to make 8 phone calls to get that appointment, then I now know that the market's starting to soften. So I just ramp up all my numbers and I can still hit my bottom line. Because I had a situation, maybe you guys have a different deal than this, but my situation always was, my banks, my mortgage company, my car payments, what have you, the grocery store, didn't care if the market was soft. They still wanted their money. So it didn't really make any difference to them. So it made a difference to me that if I'm not going to, I have to hit my numbers. My numbers were what I had to hit. How many calls I had to make would change as the market adjusted. When the market was soft, it was hard, then I was there I was dialing for dollars all night long. When it was really good, that's when I was taking more time off my family because I could hit my numbers in a shorter time frame. So I did it backwards to what most of the people were doing. Most of the people would wear themselves out during a hot market and burn out, and many times leave the industry because they'd be so burnt out. And then they'd be starving to death and freaking out and laying in a fetal position with their thumb in their mouth in a bad market because, oh woe is me. I was operating the opposite thing. I was working harder during the downtime and taking it easy during the good time. Could I have made more money during a good time? Yeah, but I have a family and those things were important to me. So you have to kind of evaluate how you want to put all this together. But you could see where things were going, and you'd see it before the marketplace told you that it was there, because I'd started seeing it just because it took more dials to get that appointment, it took more appointments to get a contract. So those things can really make a big difference for you if you will take that and embrace that concept. So guys, that's really all I really want to talk about. I wanted to get this out before the end of the year so that you can sit down and try to work on making some plans. If you got any questions, give me a buzz, 317-610-7458. You can get a hold of me at jmorgan@caringtransitions.com. I'll be glad to go over that stuff with you. Talk to you later.